I still see her face in my nightmares. 22 years old, blue lips, the intubation tube snaking from her mouth as her father clutched her limp hand. Third Solenox overdose this week, Dr. Gray whispered behind me. Then she handed me the prescription bottle with my own signature on it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just a pharmaceutical rep with a $200,000 salary and a company Lexus. I was a drug dealer in a tailored suit, and my company had engineered the most lethal legal drug epidemic in American history. My name is Dr. Marcus Reed, and for 11 years I was a senior medical liaison for Nexus Pharmaceuticals. My job was to convince doctors to prescribe our blockbuster painkiller, Selenox. What began as a career built on the promise of helping patients manage pain became my personal descent into an abyss of corporate greed, criminal negligence, and thousands of preventable deaths. I still remember the chill that ran down my spine during that pre-dawn hospital visit in rural Kentucky. My territory in 2008. I was following up with Dr. Eleanor Gray, the hospital's head of pain management, a key prescriber we'd recently converted to Solenox. She'd called earlier that evening, her voice trembling. "You need to see this for yourself, Marcus," she'd said. Now, as I pushed through the double doors of the ER, the night shift charge nurse greeted me with suspicious eyes. "Another one," she muttered, nodding toward a treatment room. Inside, a young woman, she couldn't have been older than 22, lay unconscious on a gurney, an intubation tube snaking from her mouth. Beside her, a weathered man in a coal-stained work jacket clutched her limp hand, his shoulders heaving with silent sobs. "Third Solenox overdose this week," Dr. Gray whispered, suddenly appearing behind me. Her eyes, bloodshot from her 30-hour shift, held mine with accusatory intensity. "You told me it was practically non-addictive." The words felt like a knife between my ribs, because I had told her that, repeating the carefully crafted marketing language that Nexus had drilled into us. Less than 1% addiction rate when used as prescribed, we'd assure physicians, flashing confidence-inspiring graphs from company-funded studies. I muttered some rehearsed response about patient compliance and off-label use, but the girl's shallow breathing seemed to drown out my words. Dr. Gray handed me a prescription bottle. "Her father found this in her purse. Look at the prescribing physician." My stomach dropped when I saw my own signature on the pharmacy sticker. 3 months earlier, I'd brought her father, a long-haul trucker with chronic back pain, to one of our patient education dinners where we'd convinced him to ask his doctor for Selenox. That night marked the beginning of my awakening. Back at corporate headquarters in Boston, Nexus Pharmaceuticals had evolved from a family-owned business into a profit-driven machine under the leadership of CEO Richard Sackler, the grandson of our founder. The Sackler family owned the majority of Nexus stock, and their personal fortunes had swelled to over $13 billion thanks largely to Solenox. The company's gleaming 40-story tower rose above the Charles River, like a monument to pharmaceutical innovation. Inside those walls, I'd once felt proud to be part of something revolutionary, a new approach to pain management that promised to improve millions of lives. In 2007, when our marketing team first gathered in the sleek boardroom overlooking the Boston skyline, Richard Sackler himself had unveiled the strategy that would catapult Solenox from a moderate success to a blockbuster. "Pain is now the fifth vital sign," he announced, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of dynastic wealth. We're not just selling a medication, we're selling freedom from suffering. The genius of our approach was in its calculated targeting. We focused on primary care physicians rather than pain specialists, doctors with less training in addiction medicine, but who wrote the most prescriptions. We created pain management educational conferences at luxury resorts, recruiting physician thought leaders with six-figure consulting contracts to promote Solenox to their peers. I'd excelled at building these relationships. My background as a pharmacist gave me credibility, and I genuinely believed we were helping. When concerns about addiction surfaced, we'd been trained to minimize them. Pseudo-addiction, we called it. They need more medication, not less. But as the years passed, the reports of addiction, overdoses, and deaths multiplied. Internal emails showed that our executives knew the dangers early on. I remember sitting in my hotel room in Lexington, reading a confidential report that crossed my desk by mistake. Our own analysts had concluded that the addiction rate wasn't the less than 1% we advertised, but closer to 30% in some populations. The evidence of our deception was mounting, yet at each national sales meeting, we celebrated ever-growing profits. Nexus sales reps who hit their targets received bonuses that doubled their salaries. Top performers were inducted into the Royal Court, an elite club rewarded with Rolex watches and trips to Hawaii. I had 3 such watches in my dresser drawer, ticking reminders of my complicity. In 2013, I was promoted to regional director, overseeing 30 sales reps across 5 states. My territory included West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio, what would later be called the epicenter of the opioid epidemic. In county after county, I watched as prescription rates soared and morgues filled. The breaking point came during a closed-door leadership meeting in 2016. Janet Morris, our marketing director, presented slides showing direct correlations between our sales visits to physicians and increased prescribing rates, alongside rising overdose statistics in the same regions. We might need to consider a more conservative approach, she suggested tentatively. Richard Sackler's response chilled the room. The addiction is not our problem, he said flatly. We have legitimate patients who need relief. If some people abuse our medication, that's a law enforcement issue. That night, alone in my hotel room, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man looking back at me had a $200 haircut, a tailored suit, and eyes that couldn't meet their own gaze. My phone buzzed with a text from my wife. Mrs. Lewin's son died last night. Overdose. Isn't she your doctor in Charleston? Elaine Lewin was more than just my doctor in Charleston. She was a rural family physician who'd initially resisted prescribing Solenox until I arranged for her to become a paid speaker at our events. Her son had injured his shoulder playing college baseball. I'd personally assured her that Solenox was safe for short-term use. Something broke inside me that night. I began secretly copying internal documents, emails discussing addiction rates, marketing strategies, targeting vulnerable populations, and directives to sales reps to downplay risks. I recorded conversations with executives. I compiled prescription data showing how certain doctors went from writing virtually no opioid prescriptions to hundreds per month after our visits. For 8 months, I played the role of dedicated company man while building my case. The stress was unbearable. Weight loss, insomnia, panic attacks. My marriage began to crumble as I withdrew into my private mission. My wife thought I was having an affair. In a way, I was, with the truth. In April 2017, I contacted the Justice Department. 2 days later, I was called to a surprise meeting with HR and security. Someone had noticed my unusual access to company servers. They terminated me on the spot, escorting me from the building under the watchful eyes of colleagues I'd worked alongside for over a decade. The federal investigation lasted 2 years. Nexus fought back viciously, deploying an army of attorneys to discredit me. They claimed I was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge for being passed over for promotion. They dug into my past, finding and amplifying every mistake I'd ever made. Former friends and colleagues avoided me like a contagion. But the evidence was irrefutable. In 2019, Nexus Pharmaceuticals pleaded guilty to criminal charges of marketing fraud and agreed to pay $8.3 billion in penalties. The Sackler family ultimately negotiated a settlement requiring them to relinquish control of the company and pay $4.5 billion in damages, though they admitted no personal wrongdoing. The resolution brought little satisfaction. No amount of money could resurrect the 450,000 Americans who died from opioid overdoses between 1999 and 2019. No corporate settlement could rebuild the communities devastated by addiction.